My beloved child. Something within you has been shifting, quietly, almost too gently to notice at first. It didn't arrive like a storm. It didn't demand your attention. Instead, it settled into the spaces between your thoughts, waiting, observing, as if it already knew you would eventually feel it. And now, here you are. Not by accident. Not by coincidence. Because something that was once hidden, is no longer willing to stay that way. There was a moment, long before today, when your soulmate stood at the edge of a truth. A truth so simple, yet so heavy, that even they didn't fully understand why they couldn't say it out loud. It wasn't fear in the way people usually think. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of hesitation that comes when the heart knows something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Pause for a second. What if the silence you felt wasn't distance? What if it was something forming? Because from the very beginning, there was something unusual about the connection between you. Not loud. Not chaotic. But precise, like two frequencies quietly aligning without needing explanation. And in that alignment, something unspoken began to grow. They noticed it first. But they didn't have the words. And you felt it too, but you learned to question it. That's where the truth began to hide. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real to be expressed too early. Let that settle in. Because what they held back wasn't a rejection. It wasn't indifference. It was something they were still learning how to carry. There were moments, you remember them, even if they felt small at the time, when their energy shifted around you. A hesitation before speaking. A glance that lingered just a second longer than it should. A silence that didn't feel empty, but full of something waiting to be understood. Those weren't random. They were clues. Clues of a truth that didn't yet have permission to exist in the open. And here's where it becomes interesting. Because while you were trying to make sense of what you felt, they were trying to make sense of what they couldn't explain. Two people. Same connection. Different levels of awareness. Do you see it? This is why things didn't unfold in a straight line. This is why there were moments of closeness, followed by distance that didn't make sense. It wasn't a game. It wasn't confusion. It was timing, trying to catch up with truth. And somewhere along the way, they made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic one. Not something spoken out loud. Just a subtle internal choice. To hold this, until I understand it. But what they didn't realize was that some truths don't wait forever. They don't disappear, but they evolve. They find new ways to surface. And that's exactly what's happening now. You may have noticed it recently, in the smallest ways. A thought that comes out of nowhere. A memory that suddenly feels more meaningful than it did before. A feeling that doesn't ask for logic, yet refuses to be ignored. That's not your imagination. That's the truth, beginning to move again. Don't skip this part, because something important is waiting for you in what comes next. Because the truth they held back wasn't just about them. It was about you too. And maybe, just maybe, you've been closer to understanding it than you think. Think about the moments when you felt something deeper than words could explain, but you brushed it aside. Why? Was it because it didn't make sense? Or because it made too much sense, too soon? There's a difference. And that difference is where everything begins to shift. Because what's unfolding now isn't a sudden revelation. It's a quiet return. A return to something that was always there, just waiting for the right moment to be seen clearly. And the moment is approaching, slowly, gently. But undeniably. You're not chasing it. You're not forcing it. You're becoming aware of it. That's why it feels different this time. More grounded. More real. Less like a question, and more like a realization forming in the background. But here's the part that most people miss. The truth they held back wasn't incomplete. It was simply unspoken. There's a difference. Because something unspoken doesn't lose its meaning. It just waits for the right space to be understood. And now, that space is opening. You might feel it in the way your thoughts have been changing. Less confusion. More clarity, even if it's quiet. Less chasing answers. More allowing them to come to you. That's not random. That's alignment. And alignment doesn't rush. It reveals. Slowly. Piece by piece. Until suddenly, everything that once felt uncertain begins to make a strange kind of sense. And when that happens, you won't feel overwhelmed. You'll feel calm. Like something inside you finally clicked into place. But we're not there yet. Not fully. Because before the truth becomes clear, it needs one more moment to unfold. And that moment is closer than you think. There's a subtle moment that most people overlook, a moment so quiet, it almost disappears before it's even noticed. And yet, everything begins to change right there. It doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives with a feeling. A feeling that something you once questioned is no longer asking to be questioned. Pause. Have you felt that lately? That strange calm replacing the need to figure everything out? Because that's where their truth begins to reach you, not through words, not through explanations, but through a shift inside you that you didn't create, yet somehow recognize. They've been carrying something for longer than you realize. Not because they wanted to keep it from you, but because they didn't know how to give it without changing everything. And deep down, they knew, once it was spoken, nothing would go back to how it was before. So they waited. Not in stillness, but in quiet observation. Watching how you moved, how you felt, how you responded to the space between you. Because in that space, they were searching for something. A sign. A moment. A readiness. And here's where it becomes deeper. Because while they were waiting for clarity, something unexpected happened. You began to change. Not dramatically. Not in a way that demanded attention. But in a way that shifted your energy, your awareness, your presence. You started to see things differently. Feel things differently. Even the silence between you began to feel less like distance, and more like something unfinished. That's not coincidence. That's connection evolving. Because what they couldn't say before is now finding another way to reach you. Through your intuition. Through your awareness. Through those quiet realizations that seem to appear out of nowhere. But they're not out of nowhere. They're coming from a truth that has been trying to meet you halfway. And now, you're finally meeting it. Let that sink in. Because this is the part where everything begins to feel different. Not louder. Not more intense. But more certain. Like something inside you is no longer asking, "What does this mean?" It's starting to say, "I already know." And that knowing, that quiet, steady knowing, is exactly what they were waiting for. Because the truth they held back was never meant to confuse you. It was meant to arrive when you could feel it without needing proof. And now, something inside you is no longer searching. It's recognizing. That's the shift. And once recognition begins, it doesn't stop. You may notice it in the smallest ways. A sentence that suddenly makes sense when you remember something they once said. A moment that felt insignificant before, now carrying a deeper meaning. A realization that gently taps on your awareness, as if it's been waiting patiently for you to notice. That's not imagination. That's alignment revealing itself. Stay with this, because something important is unfolding right now. Because while you're beginning to understand what was hidden, they are beginning to feel something too. A pull. A quiet urgency. Not rushed, not chaotic. But undeniable. As if something inside them is saying, "It's time." And here's the part that changes everything. They don't fully understand why now. They just feel it. The same way you're starting to feel something you can't completely explain. Two experiences. Happening separately. But connected by the same truth. Do you see it? This is no longer about waiting. This is about alignment catching up. Because when two people begin to understand the same truth, even in different ways, something begins to move between them. Silently. Naturally. Without force. And that movement is already happening. You might not see it yet in the physical world. But you can feel it. In the way your thoughts return to them, without effort. In the way your emotions feel calmer, instead of uncertain. In the way something inside you is no longer resisting what you once tried to ignore. That's not coincidence. That's truth becoming visible. But there's still one layer left. One piece they haven't fully faced yet. Not because they're avoiding it, but because it requires something they weren't ready to give before. And now, they're getting closer to that moment. Closer than they've ever been. Because holding it in is no longer easier than expressing it. And when that shift happens, everything changes. But not all at once. Not in a way that overwhelms. In a way that feels inevitable. Like something that was always meant to arrive, finally stepping into the light. And just before that moment fully reveals itself, there's a quiet realization that begins to form. Not just in them, but in you. A realization that makes you pause and think, what if this was never hidden from me, but simply waiting for me to understand it this way? And when that question becomes clear, the answer won't feel distant anymore. It will feel familiar, closer than you expected. And that's when the next part begins to unfold. There comes a point where the silence between two souls stops feeling like a gap and starts feeling like a bridge. Not something you cross with effort, but something that forms beneath you the moment you stop trying so hard to understand it. And this is where you are now. Right on that edge. Right where something unspoken begins to take shape in a way that no words ever could. Because the truth they carried is no longer just theirs. It's reaching you, not as information, but as recognition. Have you noticed how certain feelings don't leave anymore? They don't fade like before. They don't confuse you the same way. Instead, they stay. Calm. Steady. Almost as if they're asking you to trust them, without explaining themselves. That's new. And it matters more than you think. Because before, you were trying to understand the connection. Now, you're beginning to experience it. There's a difference. One lives in questions. The other lives in knowing. And knowing doesn't rush. It settles. It grounds itself quietly inside you until it becomes part of how you see everything. This is why things are starting to feel clearer. Not perfectly clear, but enough. Enough to make you pause. Enough to make you wonder if what you felt all along was never wrong. Just early. Let that sit with you for a moment. Because timing has been the invisible force behind all of this. Not distance. Not confusion. Not even hesitation. Just timing, aligning things in a way that couldn't have been forced. And now, it's no longer holding things back. It's revealing them. Slowly, carefully, but undeniably. On their side. Something has shifted too. But it didn't happen suddenly. It built up. Through every moment they tried to ignore what they felt. Through every time they chose silence over expression. Through every pause where they almost said something, but didn't. All of that didn't disappear. It accumulated. And now, it's reaching a point where it can no longer stay contained in the same way. Not because they are being pushed, but because the truth itself is ready to be lived, not just felt. Do you understand what that means? It means this is no longer about realization alone. It's about movement. Subtle, but real. And you might already be sensing it. In the way your thoughts feel more connected to them, without effort. In the way something inside you feels prepared, even if you don't know for what exactly. In the way your heart doesn't feel like it's waiting anymore. But simply, open. That openness. That quiet readiness. Is what changes everything. Because the truth they held back needed more than time. It needed space. Space for both of you to grow into it, without pressure, without expectation. And now that space has done its work. Now, what once felt distant, is beginning to feel close. Not physically, but internally. And internal closeness always comes first. Stay with this feeling. Because something important is about to become clearer. There's a moment approaching. A moment where something small, something simple, will carry more meaning than anything that came before it. It might not look extraordinary from the outside. It might not seem dramatic. But inside, it will shift everything. Because in that moment, you won't just feel the truth. You'll recognize it. Without doubt. Without needing confirmation. And when that happens, you'll understand why it had to unfold this way. Why it couldn't be rushed. Why it couldn't be spoken too soon. Because if it had been, it wouldn't have reached this depth. It wouldn't have felt this real. But we're not fully there yet. There's still one final layer, one final realization, that needs to surface before everything aligns completely. And this last part, it's not about them. It's about you. About something within you that has been quietly transforming through all of this. Something you may not have even noticed, until now. Because while you were focused on what they felt, what they said, what they didn't say, something inside you was becoming ready. Ready to receive the truth, not with questions, but with understanding. And that changes everything. Because when you're ready in that way, the truth doesn't feel like something new. It feels like something you've always known, finally being seen clearly. And as that realization begins to settle, there's one quiet question that rises to the surface. A question that doesn't demand an answer, but changes everything the moment you feel it. What if this connection was never uncertain? Only unfolding in a way I couldn't see before? Sit with that. Because the answer to that question is already closer than you think. And when it fully arrives, it won't feel like a surprise. It will feel like a return. And that return is where everything finally comes together.